hostess looked right through me. Not past me, through me. The way you look at a piece of furniture that's been in the same corner so long you stop registering. It's there. She had a clipboard, a headset, and a smile that could sell timeshares, and she turned it on everyone who walked through that door except me. I was standing 4 feet away in a sport coat I'd worn to my daughter's college graduation, and she just didn't see me. My son-in-law finally noticed me from across the lobby. He walked over, and I thought he was going to say something. Welcome me in. Put a hand on my shoulder the way you do when someone matters to you. Instead, he handed me a lanyard with a laminated card on it. It said, vendor support. I stood there holding it. 63 years old, retired structural engineer. The man who had co-signed the original lease on this building 18 months ago when no bank would touch my daughter and her husband because they had no credit history in commercial real estate. I had put my name and my pension behind this place, and now I was holding a lanyard that said vendor support. My daughter was across the room. She saw me. She smiled the way you smile at someone you're glad to see but can't deal with right now. Then she turned back to her guests. I put the lanyard in my jacket pocket. I didn't make a scene. I never do. But I remember exactly how the carpet felt under my feet as I walked back through those glass doors, and I remember thinking, this is the moment. Right here. This is where everything changes. Let me back up. My name is Conrad. I spent 31 years as a licensed structural engineer in the Pacific Northwest, mostly commercial builds. Office parks, a few schools, one hospital wing I'm still quietly proud of. My wife passed when my daughter Paige was 19 and my son Derek was 16. I raised them the rest of the way alone. Not perfectly, but I showed up. Every single time I showed up. Paige married a man named Glenn about 6 years ago. Glenn is the kind of person who has strong opinions about wine and very little experience paying for it. He's not a bad man. I want to be fair about that. He's charming when he wants to be, and he clearly loves my daughter in his way. But Glenn has always seen me as a resource rather than a person. I noticed it early. I told myself I was being uncharitable. I wasn't. 2 years ago, Paige came to me with a business plan. She wanted to open an event venue, weddings, corporate dinners, that kind of thing. She'd been working in hospitality management for years and genuinely had the skills for it. The plan itself was solid. I read every page. I asked questions. I believed in it. The problem was capital. They needed a commercial lease on a space downtown, and the landlord wanted a guarantor with documented assets and a credit score that Glenn, at 38 with 2 max cards and a lease on a truck he couldn't really afford, could not provide. I could. I co-signed the lease. 18 months, first right of renewal. I also liquidated a chunk of a brokerage account my wife and I had been building since the late 90s. Not my retirement. I want to be clear about that. I'd learned enough from watching friends make that mistake. But it was real money. $42,000. I wired it to their business account in 2 transfers and told Paige to call it a gift, not a loan, because I didn't want money between us. I also let them use a small commercial van I owned outright. It had been my brother's. He left it to me when he passed, and I'd kept it serviced because I couldn't bring myself to sell it. They needed it for supply runs, they said. Just temporarily. That was 22 months ago. The venue opened 9 months after that and did well almost immediately. Paige has a gift for this. She really does. Within 6 months, they were booking 3 to 4 events a week. The photos she posted online were beautiful. I liked every single one. I was invited to the soft opening. I sat at a table near the kitchen with a cousin of Glenn's I'd never met and a woman from their accountant's office. Paige waved at me from across the room twice. Glenn shook my hand once when I arrived and once when I left. At no point did either of them introduce me to anyone as the person who had made the building possible. I told myself it was a busy night. Opening jitters. These things happen. 6 weeks later came the grand opening gala. This was the real event. The one with the photographer and the local press mention and the catered food from a restaurant I recognized. I got dressed up. I drove 40 minutes. I walked through the door feeling honestly proud. Proud of Paige. Proud that I'd helped make something real happen. That's when the hostess looked through me. That's when Glenn handed me the lanyard. I stood in the lobby for maybe 2 minutes after he walked away. Long enough to understand what was happening. Long enough to look around the room and see who was there. Paige's in-laws at the head table, Glenn's business contacts being worked the room like prospects, a photographer capturing all of it, and understand what I was not. I was not a guest. I was not the co-signer of the lease that made this room possible. I was vendor support. I took the lanyard out of my pocket. I set it on the hostess stand gently next to her clipboard. She finally looked at me then. I said, "I won't be staying." I walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment. The parking garage was quiet. My own breath was loud. Then I called my attorney. I want to explain something about the cosign because this matters. When I signed as guarantor on that lease, I signed as an equal party to the contract. That's standard. The guarantor assumes full liability if the primary tenants default. What's less commonly understood is that depending on how the agreement is structured, a guarantor can also have certain notification rights and, in some jurisdictions, the right to petition for release from the guarantee under specific conditions, particularly if the primary tenants have materially altered their financial obligations without notifying the guarantor. Glenn had done exactly that. I found out later, my attorney found out technically that 8 months in, Glenn had taken on a significant equipment loan using the venue as a business asset. New audio system, new lighting rig, a commercial kitchen upgrade. The loan was secured against the business I was still on the hook for if anything went sideways. He had not told me. He had not asked me. He had, it turned out, been quietly assuming I would just remain in the background, available if needed, silent otherwise. A name on a document, not a person in the room. My attorney is a woman named Patricia who I've worked with on property matters for 15 years. When I called her from the parking garage that night, I told her what had happened. Not just the lanyard. All of it. The equipment loan. The van that was still sitting in the parking lot with my brother's name still on the registration because I'd never gotten around to transferring the title and they'd never asked me to. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Conrad, how soon do you want to move on this?" I thought about Paige's face across that room, the wave, the smile that said, "Not now." I said, "Give me 2 weeks to be sure." Those 2 weeks were the strangest of my life. I went about my days normally. I had coffee with a friend I've known since my engineering days. I watched a game. I called my son Derek, who lives in Colorado now and who had never been asked to contribute anything to the venue, and therefore had no idea any of this was happening. I didn't tell him yet. I just wanted to hear his voice. I also did something I hadn't done in months. I drove past the venue on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of unremarkable Tuesday when nobody is watching. I sat in my car across the street and watched a delivery truck pull up, watched someone carry boxes in through the side entrance, watched the whole ordinary machinery of a functioning business doing its thing. I had made that possible. I wasn't angry, exactly. Anger felt too hot for what I was carrying. It was something colder and quieter, a kind of clarity. The same feeling I used to get on a job site when I could see a load-bearing problem that everyone else had missed. You don't panic, you get precise. I called Patricia at the end of the 2 weeks. I told her to proceed. The first thing we addressed was the van. Because I had never transferred the title, the vehicle was still legally mine. Glenn had been driving it for nearly 2 years, but possession isn't ownership, and the registration was in my name and my deceased brother's name, and I was the surviving party. My attorney sent a formal letter giving them 10 days to return the vehicle or face a claim for unauthorized use. Glenn called me 4 days later. His voice had a quality I hadn't heard before. Not quite panic, not quite anger, somewhere between the two. "There must be some misunderstanding," he said. "There isn't," I said. "Paige and I have been using that van for the business." I know. I've been aware of that the whole time. The title is mine. I'd like it back. He was quiet for a moment. Then, is this about the opening? Conrad, if you felt excluded. Glenn, I said, this isn't a feelings conversation. This is a property conversation. The van needs to be returned within the window specified in the letter. They returned it on day 8. The second thing we addressed was the guarantee. My attorney filed a formal petition for release based on the material change in the business's financial obligations, specifically the equipment loan Glenn had taken out without notifying me. This was not a certainty. Courts don't always grant these, but the case was solid because the lease agreement had a clause, buried in paragraph 14, that required the guarantor to be notified of any new debt instruments secured against the business exceeding $10,000. Glenn's loan had been for $68,000. He had never sent me a letter, never made a phone call, never mentioned it. The landlord, as it turned out, hadn't been told either. He was not pleased. While the petition was being processed, I did one more thing. I had a conversation with my daughter. I drove to the venue on a Wednesday morning before it opened. Paige was there alone doing inventory or bookkeeping or something. I could see her through the front window before she saw me. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had been carrying more than she was letting on for longer than she should have. I knocked. She let me in. We sat in the empty event space at one of the round tables still draped in white linen from whatever event had been the night before. The room smelled like candles and cleaned floors. It was actually beautiful. I told her that. "Dad," she said, "what's going on?" I told her. All of it. The petition, the van, the equipment loan I'd discovered, the lanyard. She went very still when I mentioned the loan. She didn't know. I could see it on her face. The specific look of someone realizing they've also been kept in the dark. That surprised me. I had assumed she'd known. I had assumed they'd made the decision together. "He didn't tell me either," she said quietly. We sat with that for a while. I wasn't there to punish my daughter. I want to be very clear about that. I was there because she deserved to know what was happening with her own business, because $68,000 of new debt, secured against a business I was still guaranteeing, was not a small thing, and because I loved her too much to let her find out from an attorney's filing rather than from her father. "The petition doesn't affect you directly," I told her. "If it's granted, I'm released from the guarantee going forward. The lease stays intact. You and Glenn remain the primary tenants. Nothing changes for the business day to day." "Unless we default," she said. "Unless you default," I agreed, "which is why you need to know about that loan." She looked at the tablecloth for a long time. Then she said something that I've thought about almost every day since. She said, "Dad, I'm sorry about the lanyard." Just that. Nothing else. No explanation. No defense of Glenn. No suggestion that I'd misread the situation. Just, "I'm sorry about the lanyard." I nodded. I reached across and put my hand over hers for a moment, the way I used to when she was small and had fallen and was deciding whether to cry. Then I stood up, put my jacket on, and left. The petition was granted 6 weeks later. I was formally released from the guarantee. I was no longer liable if the business defaulted. The landlord, having been alerted to the unauthorized loan, added a covenant to the renewed lease requiring him to be notified of any new debt instruments over $5,000 and extended the same courtesy notification to me as a matter of good faith, even though I was no longer the guarantor. He's a straightforward man. I think he respected that I'd handled things quietly. Glenn tried to call me 3 times during that period. I returned each call and kept each conversation brief and factual. He cycled through several approaches: conciliatory, defensive, vaguely accusatory, but I didn't take the bait on any of them. There was nothing to argue about. The documents said what they said. The $42,000 I'd given them as a gift remained a gift. I didn't ask for it back. I had called it a gift, and I meant it, and I don't go back on what I mean. The van I kept. I had it serviced. I'm not sure yet what I'll do with it. Sometimes I just sit in it in my driveway for a few minutes, which I know sounds strange, but it still smells like my brother a little, if I'm being honest, and that's worth something. My son Derek came to visit last spring. He lives in Fort Collins now, teaches high school history, has a daughter named Ren who is 4 years old and absolutely runs that household. He came alone for the weekend, just the two of us, which we haven't done in years. I told him the whole story over 2 nights and a lot of coffee. He listened the way he always has, without interrupting, just letting me talk until I was done. When I finished, he said, "Dad, why didn't you call me when any of this was happening?" I thought about that. "I didn't want you to carry it," I said. He looked at me with the particular expression he's had since he was about 14, the one that says, "Dad, you're being ridiculous, but too kind to say it outright." "You're allowed to put it down sometimes," he said. "That's what we're here for." I didn't say anything, but I thought about my wife then, about the particular way she could make me feel less alone without trying, about the fact that I'd been trying to carry everything the way I always had, the way I thought I was supposed to, and maybe that was its own kind of mistake. Paige and I have talked several times since that morning at the venue. Real conversations, not the surface-level check-ins we'd slipped into over the past couple of years. She's working through some things, she and Glenn are working through some things. I don't involve myself in that. It's not mine to fix. What I can tell you is that she came to my house for Thanksgiving, alone, without Glenn, which I didn't ask about and she didn't explain. We made turkey and mashed potatoes and watched football and talked about her mother for the first time in years. She cried a little. I did too. Before she left, she stood at the door for a moment, coat on, keys in hand, and she said, "I'm proud of you, Dad. I know that sounds backwards, but I am." I didn't know what to say to that. "Go drive safe," I told her. "Text me when you're home." She did. I've thought a lot about what I would have done differently. Honest answer, not much on the financial side. I would have had an attorney review the terms of the guarantee from day one rather than trusting a handshake understanding. I would have gotten the van title transferred or not offered the van at all, so there was no ambiguity. I would have had a clearer conversation with Paige early on about what my involvement meant and what I expected in return. Not financially, but as a human being. As her father, what I've learned is something I probably already knew, but hadn't fully lived. Your name on a document is not a relationship. Your money in someone's account is not love. You can give everything you have to someone and still be invisible to them if they've decided to see you that way. And you can spend a long time waiting for them to see you differently before you understand that the only thing you can actually control is where you choose to stand. I chose to walk out of that lobby. I chose to make the call from the parking garage. I chose to sit across a white draped table from my daughter and tell her the truth. None of those were easy choices, but they were mine. And when I made them, I stopped waiting for someone else to decide how much I was worth. The hostess at that gala looked through me like I was furniture. I haven't thought about her in months. I think about my brother's van and Derek's kid learning to say my name and Paige texting me home safe from the highway and the hospital wing I built in 2009 that's still standing exactly as I designed it. I think about what I'm still building. That's enough. That's more than enough. I keep coming back to the moment I said that lanyard on the hostess stand. Not the attorney call, not the petition, not even the conversation with Paige at the white draped table. Just that one quiet moment, picking up a piece of plastic that someone had handed me like I was a stranger at my own family's milestone, and setting it down like it meant nothing, because that's what it deserved. People ask, when they hear a story like this, whether I regret giving so much in the first place. The 42,000, the cosign, the van. And I've sat with that question long enough to answer it honestly. No, not because it all worked out, but because the giving itself came from the right place. I helped because I believed in my daughter. I believed in what she was building. The problem was never the generosity. It was the silence I kept around it. I never said clearly enough what I needed in return, which wasn't money or credit or a seat at the head table. It was just to be seen. To be a father, not a financial instrument. That silence was my part in it, owning that matters. There's something I've come to understand about how life tends to settle accounts, not through luck or punishment, but through the natural weight of choices accumulating over time. Glenn made decisions that treated people like ledger entries. What can I get? What can I avoid disclosing? What can I hold on to? That kind of thinking doesn't collapse overnight. It compounds quietly until one day the structure can't hold. I've been a structural engineer long enough to know that a hidden load-bearing problem doesn't announce itself. It just gives way. My daughter is smarter than she was 2 years ago. Not because something was done to her, but because she did the hard thing of looking clearly at what was in front of her. That takes a particular kind of honesty, the willingness to see a situation accurately even when it cost you something to see it. Paige had that in her. She just needed the moment to call on it. And Derek, who drove nothing, signed nothing, gave nothing financially, showed up with a cup of coffee and 2 evenings of listening, and reminded me that I'd been trying to carry everything alone for so long that I'd forgotten it was allowed to be set down. That's its own kind of wisdom, the steadiness to show up for someone without an agenda. I could learn from my own son. I have been. As for me, I'm 63, and I'm still building things. Not with blueprints anymore, mostly. But the same principles apply. You check your load calculations before you commit. You get the terms in writing. You don't let the desire to be generous override the responsibility to be clear. And when something in the structure is wrong, you don't patch over it and hope you address it precisely, quietly, and without drama. The lanyard is in a drawer somewhere. I haven't thrown it out. Maybe that sounds strange, but I think I keep it the same way I keep certain job site photos from projects that didn't go smoothly. Not as a wound, but as a reminder. This is what it looks like when you let yourselves become invisible. Don't do it again. The van sits in my driveway. I drove it last Tuesday. No particular reason. Just needed to get somewhere and it was there. It still smells like my brother. Some things you hold on to not because they're useful, but because they remind you who you come from. I know who I come from. I know what I've built. I know what I'm worth. That's not arrogance, that's just finally paying attention.